In the article that you just read, you learned a little bit about the background of schizophrenia, and I'm now going to simplify some of those more complex topics and ideas that are crucial to understanding what the discovery of the biological basis behind schizophrenia really means and how important it is. We're going to start by talking about a key topic within biology known as the central dogma. And what the central dogma states is that your DNA, or your genetic material, codes for your RNA, which is responsible for copying the information from the DNA and then turning it into proteins. Now, this whole process is vital in biology because it is responsible for the creation of your traits and behaviors. So these proteins will then code for your specific traits and behaviors. And in our case, we're going to be looking at the coding of schizophrenia. Now, there's a little bit more that you need to know about DNA, and that is its relationship to both chromosomes and genes. DNA contains the information that makes you unique through the creation of proteins. A gene is simply a specific portion of that DNA which will code for a specific protein. Now, since there is so much important information in the form of DNA and many genes, the DNA molecules must be tightly packed into structures called chromosomes, which you can see here. We're now going to go into a little bit more of the specifics. In a recently published study, it was found that the gene associated with the heightened risk of schizophrenia is called the complement component 4, or C4 gene. And this gene is known for having a high level of structural flexibility. What does this mean? Basically, it means that it is common for different people to have a different amount of copies or alternate types of the gene. Researchers who found that those who had a certain structure of the C4 gene had an increased expression of it in their brain. Basically, this just means that they had more C4, and the people with more C4 were found to have a higher risk of developing schizophrenia. And this increased risk is due to fewer synaptic connections being made. However, in order to understand what that means, we are first going to go into some information about neurons. So here's an image that shows what a neuron looks like. Neurons are responsible for sending important signals or messages throughout the body, and they do this by communicating with one another. If you note the arrow above, we can see that our signal is going to the right. How does it go through the neuron? First, the signal is received in the dendrites. It is then processed and sent along the axon, and once the signal reaches the axon terminals, it will exit and go on to the next neuron. Now, here's an image showing two neurons next to each other. Our signal is traveling between them, so each neuron will receive a different name. The neuron on the left is the presynaptic neuron, and this is the neuron that is sending the signal. And then we have our postsynaptic neuron, which is the one receiving the signal. And note that our message on top is still traveling in the same direction. So our signal will travel from the dendrites of the first neuron through the axon and out the axon terminal. However, in order to reach the next neuron, the signal must go through a synapse, which is in the boxed area here. And once it does so, it can continue on its journey. The synapse is very important in relation to our C4 gene, and this is because it has been found that an increase in C4 activity or expression leads to a drop in the amount of synaptic connections. And now you're going to see what normal versus abnormal looks like. First, here we have the normally functioning synapse. This image is really zoomed in on that box area that you have previously seen. And note that the normal levels of the C4 gene are in the yellow box on the right. The purple on top is the neuron sending the signal, and the red on the bottom is the neuron receiving it. This means that the signal is traveling downward, as represented by the arrow. In order for the signal to get to the next neuron, it has to cross a space, which is the white, called the synaptic cleft. Neurons never actually touch, but they get very close together and communicate the signal by sending and receiving neurotransmitters. And these neurotransmitters are sent from the first neuron and received by the receptors on the second one. Now we're going to look at an abnormal case. So the signal is traveling in the same direction, However, this time we have an increased expression in the level of the C4. So this means there's more of the C4 gene being activated. This negatively affects the neurotransmitters. So the level of neurotransmitters successfully crossing the gap and reaching the receptors has now significantly gone down. This means that the signal reaching the second neuron is significantly reduced and the communication has been hindered. This is the main problem with schizophrenia. Now that we understand that the C4 gene is the root cause of the problem with neuron connections, and that the bad neuron connections are the problem leading to schizophrenia, we will be able to develop drugs that can, for the first time, attack an identified problem and hopefully increase the level of success of treatment of schizophrenia.